Welcome to Alabama Policy Insights. Today we get the treat of talking to my friend Derek Chen. He has an interesting personal story, and his impact on Alabama politics has already been pretty vast at a very young age. So I've asked Derek to come in and talk to us and talk to our supporters about his experience being in Alabama and what his plans are for the future.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I really appreciate you having me on. I really appreciated your friendship over the years, and I really appreciate your leadership in the conservative movement here in Alabama. My name's Derek Chen. I am an attorney. I graduated from the Cumberland School of Law, and I also have my MBA from the University of Alabama as well. But as you know, Stephanie, I was not born and raised here. I was
Right.
actually born and raised in the Socialist Republic of California.
That's right.
Born and raised
It's not
in,
what people expected you to say, but
yes, born and raised in Southern California.
Mhm.
But I knew from a very young age, being as conservative as I was, that I knew I needed to get out of there. And I knew that I needed to escape. And I made an intentional effort to see different parts of the country, to see where I liked it the best. And I just love Alabama the best.
Mhm.
And now I'm a proud resident of the great state of Alabama.
That's awesome. So tell us a little bit about your family background. Where your family is originally from, kind of their story of how they got to the U.S. and then how that impacted your thinking growing up and then now as an adult.
Sure. So, my great grandparents fought in General Chiang Kai shek's army
Hmm.
in for the KMT army in the Chinese Civil War against the communists.
Right.
And during this war, it was a brutal war that lasted for decades. But as the communists started taking over large areas of land in China,
Hmm.
Chiang Kai shek and his military retreated to the island of Taiwan. And, your listeners have probably seen this on the news, but there's still a great amount of tension
Yes,
between
absolutely.
Taiwan and China, even to this day. And there's always a threat of China attacking Taiwan and
Hmm.
trying to take it over.
Hmm.
But my great grandparents fought in the war against the communists and moved to Taiwan with Chiang Kai shek's army
Hmm.
in the aftermath of that war after the communists took over China.
Right.
And my grandparents were little kids at the time,
Hmm.
and they grew up in Taiwan.
Hmm.
So my parents were actually born and raised on the island of Taiwan.
Right.
And in the late 70s, President Jimmy Carter's administration decided that he wanted to switch diplomatic ties from Taiwan's government to China's government in Beijing. So when that happened, everybody thought that the communists were about to invade Taiwan and do so imminently.
Right.
And everybody who could get out got out or tried to get out.
Hmm.
And this was in the late 70s.
Right.
And my family immigrated to the U.S. in the early mid 80s.
Hmm.
And I always wondered, why did it take them so long to
Right.
immigrate to
Right.
this country? If everyone thought that the communists were about to
Right.
come over immediately.
Yeah, and I should know the history better, but did it settle down and then everybody just kind of left after, or why was the delay there?
So I asked my granddad this. I
Hmm.
said, Granddad, if this was in the late 70s, why did it take you guys several years before you moved to the U.S.
Hmm.
with your family?
Hmm.
And he said, I never forgot what he told me.
Mhm.
He said, Derek, yes, we were scared. Yes, we were afraid. But what kind of example would I be setting for my kids if we broke the laws of our new country in order to get here?
Wow.
We had to wait for our visas and do it the right way. And that really always stuck with me. And so that's why I think it's so important.
So they didn't come here as refugees; they came here as legal immigrants.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. They waited for their visas, went through the long vetting process,
Hmm.
because my granddad really wanted to make sure that he did things the right way. And
Right.
that's was just the kind of person he was and the
Hmm.
kind of people my family were.
Hmm. So how'd they end up in California specifically?
So they immigrated to California
Hmm.
when they first moved to the U.S. They ended up living in California.
Mm-hmm.
There's a large Asian American population in California.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's on the West Coast. It's closest to
Right.
part of the country
Right.
from where they immigrated from.
Yeah. Interesting. And so, growing up in California, you mentioned that you have conservative leanings and tendencies, which I know personally, since I know you personally. We've had a lot of deep conversations about Alabama politics, national
Yes.
politics, international politics, and we agree on probably 99.9% of things. And so, actually, I can't think of one thing, but there's probably something. Um, and so, tell me about kind of just your personal path of leaving California, going to college, and then how you ended up in Alabama.
Yeah, so born and raised in Orange County
Yep.
in a city called Fountain Valley, right next to Huntington Beach.
Mm-hmm.
Most folks never heard of Fountain Valley, but have
They've
heard of
heard of
Huntington
Yeah,
Beach.
yeah.
But I went to college in Michigan,
Mm-hmm.
actually, at a school called Hope College. It's a private Christian liberal arts college. It's affiliated with the Reformed Church.
Mm-hmm.
But while I was there, I got to be friends with the president of the college,
Mm-hmm.
and the president of the college at the time used to teach at Samford University.
Right.
And I told him, I was planning on going to law school, and
Mm-hmm.
he said, Derek, there's a school that I really want you to go look at. I
Mm-hmm.
think you'll really like it.
Mm-hmm.
It's in Birmingham, Alabama, and I used to teach there. It's
Mm-hmm.
called Samford University.
Right.
So he put me in touch with the admissions folks at Cumberland, and I
Mm-hmm.
came down to visit. Absolutely fell in love with the campus.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely fell in love with Alabama,
Yeah.
and decided to go to law school
Mm-hmm.
at Cumberland. And shortly after going to law school, I realized that this was where I wanted to spend the rest of my life.
Yeah. That's great. Well, and it makes me wonder how many people Samford has brought, like that to the state.
Yes.
That'd be an interesting thing to try to figure out. So you went to and graduated from Cumberland Law and started your law practice. What made you want to get your MBA?
So I always had a desire to learn more about all of the intricate operations of business.
Mm-hmm.
When you're an attorney and you have your own practice, you're a small businessman.
That's right. That's right.
And you need to learn how to understand the books.
Mm-hmm.
You need to understand the ways to operate and run a business.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've always been interested in business. Ever since I was a little kid, I actually have been an investor in stocks with the stock market.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned from a very young age the power of compounding.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really enjoyed getting to pick stocks since I was a little kid.
Mm-hmm.
With a custodian account from my parents, of course,
Right,
with
right.
my mom because I wasn't 18 yet,
Right,
but
right.
been doing that since I was a kid and have continued to do so. So I've just always been interested in business.
In the business side of things.
Yes.
Yeah, interesting. So you finished your MBA. Tell me a little bit about why you got involved in both state politics, and then you're also pretty involved nationally.
Yeah. So my family, with my family background,
Mm-hmm.
I saw firsthand with speaking to relatives who escaped the threat of a communist regime,
Right.
escaped the threat of an authoritarian regime, how important it was to preserve liberty and freedom
Mm-hmm.
in America. And I think oftentimes folks just focus on the national level. They
Yeah.
pay so much attention on with what's going on in Congress.
Right.
But what folks oftentimes don't think about is that state and local government really affects their day-to-day lives a lot.
Right.
And so I think it's so important to have strong, effective constitutional conservatives, not just in the national level of government, that is very important, but also the state and local levels as well, to have good, strong, effective constitutional conservatives.
Right. Right. And you touched on this earlier, talking about your your family. But let's talk about just a couple of issues. And,
Hmm.
and one of them that leaps to mind is legal versus illegal immigration. That's been a
Yes.
hot topic in the state of Alabama this legislative session, and then
Yes.
also nationally. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of giving us your thoughts about that.
Yeah, so I actually was very active with the college Republicans when I was in college
Hmm.
back when I was still a student at Hope College.
Hmm.
And this was in Michigan,
Yeah.
and at the time President Trump was running for the first time.
Hmm.
And as soon as I heard his speech, remember the speech where he came down the escalator at Trump Tower
Yeah.
and delivered his presidential campaign announcement.
Hmm.
I knew that he was a candidate that I was going to be supporting,
Hmm.
which was a really significant election for
That was early,
me.
Derek.
Yeah, because that was actually the very first election that I was old enough to vote in,
Hmm.
and so I was able to cast my very first vote for President Trump
Hmm.
during the 2016 Republican primary,
Hmm.
and but I really I really supported President Trump, uh, especially in the very beginning with his speech on illegal immigration,
Yeah.
because the president really understood the importance of supporting legal immigration
Hmm.
but combating illegal
Right.
immigration.
Right.
And he was the first candidate that I heard that was able to so eloquently articulate the problem
Mm.
with illegal immigration,
Right.
instead of trying to find amnesty
Right.
or something.
Some
He
way
said,
out.
we want you to come in legally. We have a big, beautiful door for you to come in legally, but if you're here illegally, you have to leave.
Right.
And that was something that really resonated with me, that I really supported amongst his other policy issues as well.
Right. And it's interesting because there's so many varied opinions on immigration. And so, but to me, one of the things that has not really been fleshed out is a story like your family's story, or a story where there are people who are in dangerous situations,
Hmm.
or even just uncomfortable situations, that are waiting to go through
Sure,
the process, the real, the process that is there,
sure.
and they're basically people just jumping ahead of them in line.
Sure. And the thing is, as a sovereign country, the United States has the authority to
Hmm.
decide who we want to come into our country. Nobody has a right
Right.
to come into our country. We, the American people, get to decide that.
Hmm.
And our elected representatives have passed immigration laws.
Hmm.
And I think those immigration laws need to be enforced to the
Hmm.
fullest extent. And you see the president doing that now.
Right.
And it's made a really big impact in a positive way.
Yeah, and it's a it's a difficult political issue because there are
Yes.
so many emotions involved, and it's one of those things. I really do think that the kind of the untold story of legal immigrants needs to be told.
Yes. And oftentimes I think folks uh, really don't think deeply about the issue, but here's how I would frame it.
Hmm.
It's not fair for everybody who is waiting in line to do it the right way
Hmm.
for other folks to jump them in the line.
Right.
And you have folks that are in really dangerous situations,
Hmm.
like my grandparents were.
Hmm.
And my grandparents had the Chinese communists took over Taiwan.
Hmm.
My family would have been targeted because of their prior history in the
Right.
military,
Right.
and fighting the communists. So my
Hmm.
family would have been targeted, but it's still important to do it the right way.
Hmm. On a one of another issue that is both has statewide implications and national implications is election integrity.
Yes.
And that's something that we've talked about before, just in private conversation. Um, say a little bit about what your feeling is about kind of just the general status of election integrity nationwide and then specifically in the state.
Yeah, so I think election integrity is so important
Mm-hmm.
here in Alabama. I think that it is really important for our folks to understand that only eligible U.S. citizens
Mm-hmm.
who are residents of the state of Alabama
Mm-hmm.
should ever be allowed to vote in Alabama's elections, period.
Right.
No ifs, ands, or buts.
Right.
And in order to do so, it's so important to make sure that the folks who are voting in our elections are who they say they are.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's so important to have a provision to check your photo ID when you go to vote, and that
Mm-hmm.
provision is enforced.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that I know that we've talked about, and I was trying to think before you came in this morning, I was trying to think of the first time I actually even met you, and I can't remember. I don't know if you remember, but it was probably at some meeting. You frequent a lot of political meetings across the state, but I do remember having a pretty in-depth conversation with you when our friend Representative David Wheeler passed away, and that seat was open, and your name was thrown in the hat as a possible replacement for him. And we had some pretty in-depth conversations about state issues,
Mm-hmm.
what your thoughts were, where your inclinations were, and another topic that I remember talking to you about then, because we were talking about election integrity some then, but kind of the hot topics that, change year to year.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that I remember talking to you about um, is just kind of, because I wasn't even at API then, but just kind of the idea of family and of how family values should be promoted,
Yes.
and how that helps society, and some of the social issues and the social fabric of our nation and our state being under attack. To me, it was one of those moments, because you're significantly younger than I am. But it was really refreshing to me. I remember even then, which must have been, I don't know, 5 years ago, that someone of your age has a level of wisdom on those types of issues. And so I just wanted to mention that. But
Thank you.
absolutely, another issue that I do want to touch on, that has kind of that national and statewide implication is transparency in budgetary
Mm-hmm.
spending,
Yes.
and also Doge.
Yes.
The Doge phenomenon has been really one of the most interesting impacts on Trump's first 100 days to
Mm-hmm.
me. So if you don't mind, just outline your thoughts about just kind of how that process has worked nationally. And then, as you know, because you've been involved and a supporter of API, we started AlDoge for the state of Alabama. Talk a little bit about kind of accountability for taxpayer dollars, and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. So the president established the Department of Governmental Efficiency on the federal level,
Mm-hmm.
and it's been really amazing to see how much waste and abuse his team has been able to identify via
Mm-hmm.
Doge, and been able to tackle that and cut that with just so much precision and effectiveness. And
Right.
it's been really refreshing to see that on
Mm-hmm.
the national level. And yes, many of the waste, fraud, and abuse goes on the national level,
Mm-hmm.
but it's always important to remember that we need to take a lot of those principles that President Trump is implementing in Washington down to state and local governments and the state and local government level as well, because there's always any human institution is going to have waste, fraud, and abuse.
Absolutely.
And so it is important to combat that at every level, because, oftentimes bureaucrats will get to Montgomery or they'll get to Washington, and elected officials will get to Montgomery or they'll
Mm-hmm.
get to Washington, and they think of the money as their money.
Right.
But it is not their money. It is that money belongs to the people of the state, and
Mm-hmm.
it belongs to the American people. And I think it's so important to recognize that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a slush fund for them to spend how they see fit.
Right.
It's the resources are there for them to spend for the benefit of we the people. And
Right.
oftentimes I think that gets lost, and it's important to really remember that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we agree wholeheartedly with that. The whole concept of government money,
Hmm.
that doesn't really exist. There's
Hmm.
no such thing as government money. It's taxpayer dollars being shepherded and stewarded by elected officials and by bureaucrats.
Yes.
And so, I think that's a wise way to think of it, which is
Hmm.
never think of it as government money or money that politicians have to spend, because it's not theirs in the first place.
Right.
So, and we dealt with some of that in the state in the last couple of years with having these large budget surpluses. Several states, even our surrounding states, returned a decent portion of their budget surpluses after COVID, during and after COVID, to the taxpayers. But that really wasn't part of the conversation in Alabama. Our state budgets just keep growing. So, yeah, and we established ALDOGE, and it's been an interesting process so far. And one of the things that we really have come up against is a lack of transparency,
Hmm.
whether intentional or unintentional. There's just not the attitude that the state governmental systems and operations that are in place are accountable to the people.
Hmm.
And so, there's a quote public checkbook, but it's very difficult to manage. Try to figure out exactly where money is going, and especially as it relates to federal contracts.
Sure.
And so, one of the things that I think will be an outcropping of our ALDOGE initiative will be trying to make things more transparent, so that when citizens want to try to figure out where their taxpayer dollars are going, they have the opportunity to do that.
Sure. And you bring up a great point. I would categorize it as this. If you think about it, say you own a business, a
Mm-hmm.
private business, and you're the owner of the business, and you have an employee in a certain department.
Mm-hmm.
When you say, "Hey, can I see the books this department?" They tell you no. Well,
Right.
you own the business. We
Right.
and it's the same thing with government. The
Mm-hmm.
taxpayers are the boss.
Right.
And so I think that we have to be very transparent, and the taxpayers deserve to know how their money is being spent, and they deserve to know that their resources will be spent wisely.
Mm-hmm.
That's so important.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite things about you, Derek, is that you've never met a stranger. And it's funny, not funny, haha, but funny to watch you talk to folks, because you genuinely like people and like to find out about them. You've been traveling the state over the last couple of months and even before, just kind of getting to know all the different areas and types of people.
Hmm.
And you've been actually doing that for years.
Yes.
And so I'm just curious if there is something that surprised you about the state of Alabama or some of the people that you've met along the way.
Something that surprised me as I've traveled the state, like you said, I've done so for years, is
Mm-hmm.
just how much we have in common with one another.
Yeah.
We really care about our families. And I don't have kids yet
Mm-hmm.
personally, but folks who have kids and grandkids just want a better life for their kids and their grandkids.
Right.
And it's something in common that we see all over our state.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really important that that public policy reflects the people of Alabama's values. And oftentimes, folks just want the government to get out of their way
Mm-hmm.
and let them thrive and live life and do business. And that's
Right.
why, the free market is so important.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it with family members who escaped the threat of communism, and they escaped that form, the threat of that form of government, and that's why it's so important for me, from my perspective, that we maintain free markets, we maintain liberty, and we maintain freedom here in our country, because when my grandparents escaped the threat of communism,
Mm-hmm.
they came to the United States of America.
Right.
If we lose our freedoms here at home, where do we go?
Right. Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. Well, and it's one of those things to me, and I have this little mantra of, the more we limit government, the more we increase freedom. And sometimes I think that's just lost in the weeds, especially when you're in DC or when you're in Montgomery, because so much of the conversation is around power and control and spending, which all work together. But that's interesting that you traveling around has helped you to kind of reinforce those ideas of, being involved in politics and being involved in state government isn't a way to exert control. It's a way to increase freedom.
Yes. And I think it's so important for folks in public service to remember the servant part of public
Right.
service.
Right.
You're a servant to the people. And I think that is oftentimes lost on folks, but your job is to help make the lives of the people that you serve better.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've been a longtime friend and supporter of API even before I got here, but especially after I got here, which we truly appreciate. And it's easy. It's easy for us to have kind of a reciprocal support for you, just because we believe in the same things: the free markets and the limited government and the promotion of strong families. And those are kind of broad topics. But when you drill down on them, they have all the same kind of nexus, which is that freedom question.
And they all complement one another.
Yeah, no, you're right. They definitely work together, or they don't
work against each other. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, right. Well, one more thing that I had wanted to ask you about was, just kind of your path and your story is really interesting. You've done a lot in a short period of time after moving to Alabama for Cumberland Law School. And we know that you've spent a lot of time as you've traveled kind of talking to and getting to know some of the characters that are in state politics in the state of Alabama, and some of the old guard. Yes. Which I really appreciate as well. So I'm thinking about people like Steve Flowers or Jabbo Wagner, and some people who have been in public office since before I was born, much less you. And I was just wondering if you've picked up any wisdom from any of those folks.
I have picked up a lot of wisdom from many of my friends who are a little bit older than you and I.
Thank you for throwing me in there.
But I think that, when somebody goes through a process of public service and have been in it for a long time, they pick up a lot of, different things and stuff that goes on. They live through history. And oftentimes we read about the stuff that they actually lived through in the history books. So it's just always been very interesting to hear some funny stories about stuff that, you may read, but they actually lived through it.
Yeah, so kind of a living history of Alabama politics.
Yes.
Yeah, and
like an encyclopedia.
Yeah, and there are some characters, as we know, that have been involved and are still involved in Alabama state politics. The interesting thing to me, and what I feel like is one of your strengths, is that you understand that politics is really relational. And dealing with people is and understanding who they are as people is a key part of being involved in the political system, especially in a smaller state like Alabama. It becomes a small pool of people, or a smaller pool of people than in larger states, or more, in states that have more of a diversification of thought.
Absolutely.
And don't have a Republican supermajority.
And the thing is, I have always been more interested in public policy and conservative issues than I do politics. But with our system, you have to go through the political process in order to get to implement conservative public policy.
Right. It's not enough to have a good idea.
Right.
You have to be able to work it through the process and be part of the political system in order to have it come to fruition.
Absolutely.
Right. And then we've talked about that a lot as it relates to API. Well, we wish you every success.
Thank you so much.
It'll be fun for me to see you walk through this political process, and also really, I know that you'll dig down on those issues and be loyal to your inclinations and honor your family's legacy of escaping. That threat of communism, and I know that that's probably just always present in your mind.
Absolutely. Stephanie, I just want to thank you so much for having me on this
Absolutely, my
podcast.
pleasure.
And, you've been doing such a great job with all of your work across the state.
Thank you,
And
Derek.
I just really appreciate your strong conservative leadership. It really means a lot to the state of Alabama and the people of the state.
Thank you. I really appreciate you saying that, Derek. I look forward to working with you together,
Thank you.
moving forward.
Thank you
So,
so much, Stephanie. Really
absolutely.
appreciate it. Thanks for
Sure.
having me on.
Sure.
Thank you.
So that's Alabama Policy Insights for today. Thank you, Derek Chen, for joining us, and we really appreciate everybody listening in. We'll have another episode next month. Tune in.